thank you everyone for joining us back here for Strategies for Affordable Housing and Development. We're on to our second topic here, financing for affordable units. We're going to be looking to highlight those leading practices around financing of affordable housing development projects. And I want to give a big thank you to our panelists who are joining us today. Marty Foda from the VP of United Neighborhood Centers for the last 13 years. We are also joined by Dana Hanshin, who is the president and CEO of HDC Mid-Atlantic since 2018. And prior to that, she was the deputy director of the Philadelphia LISC. Fred Benuelas, hopefully I pronounced that correctly. He is the Community Development Business Development Manager. Community Investment Business Development Manager at Federal Home Loan Bank in Pittsburgh since 2018, and prior to that he was a VP at Harrisburg Housing Authority, as well as Director of Housing Management at Dauphin County Housing Authority. So he has all three of them are very deep community development experts, and we're so honored to have all of you with us today. We're going to start with luckily the prior session helped lead in a lot of our questions here, but we're going to start with, what do you see as the greatest challenges in affordable housing finance in our current environment, and how might we overcome some of these challenges? Fred, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Okay, and I think I'm going to key in on the current environment, right? Because right now we are in unprecedented times. There is so much money in the system that we've never seen before or ever experienced it before. And I think the problem is, number one, the recipients of the money, not necessarily the developers, I'm talking about the municipalities and the people that are administrating, don't have the infrastructure to absorb all that kind of money. It's a lot of money. So policy has to be made. There's some policies that in my estimation, need to be relaxed and changed to absorb and to get some of this money through the system. But then to the developer, it's identifying these funding sources. Like, how much is actually there? Like, for example, the city of Scranton recently received $2.4 million in their home ARP funding, on top of their home allocation, on top of the ARA funding. And, how is that money being administered? How is the city handling, that? What are going to be the limitations going forward? What priorities are they putting on some of these monies to make sure some of this development gets done? For me, what I would love to see, because I don't think it's great that there's a lot of money available for this, but I don't think it's healthy for the system to have so much in such a short period of time. For me, I would love to see some kind of a mechanism that would enable some of this stuff to get stretched out so that you could continue to develop. Because think about it, if you're administering it or if you're using it, you have to build your infrastructure, and that's going to tax not only your compliance people, but also your contractors. It's going to tax everybody for a short period of time. And then what happens? You hire people, then you have to lay them off. And then you're looking and saying, we need more money again to do this all over again. So I think we need to figure out a way to responsibly use all of the money, but I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have faced in the current environment.
Thanks, Fred. Dana, do you have additional?
Certainly. So I'm going to talk a little about it in the frame of the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. So that is what the national program that is available to us to provide affordable rental housing. So even when you call it attainable housing, the program that you access is called LIHTC, and they ask what that stands for, low income, then you're exposed, right? You're serving people who are at lower income levels that are not able to be served by the market. And the reason why that program exists is because there was a market failure, right? It just doesn't make economic sense for developers out there to serve at these income levels when what it costs to build and incomes are what they are. So that is the vehicle, and I think Ira had talked a little bit about it, not so lovingly. It is an imperfect and inefficient program, but it provides about 75% of the resources to build affordable housing at scale. So when you think about strategies to address affordable housing, this is a program that builds in the range of 40 to about now up to 75 units here in the state of Pennsylvania. So you also have to think about it as sites that can accommodate that level of scale. Mm-hmm. That being said, in the environment that we're in, even though you may have all these additional resources available, we are in an inflationary environment. There's construction cost increases, there are labor shortages, there are interest rates that are going up, and all of that adds to cost to do this development. So even though we have additional resources, those are being eaten up by dealing with the current market environment. So it's very challenging, and I also would add to Fred, this is, I mean, you can tell he's been around for a while. I have been around also for a while, but 2008, we dealt with the same thing with the collapse of the housing market, right? A big influx of resources went in at the public sector to municipalities and participating jurisdictions across the country. Some had capacity, some did not. We scaled up, nonprofits scaled up, everyone scaled up to address the crisis. Those resources spiked, and then they sort of went down back to normal levels. And now here we are again with a quick spike. And we've lost that capacity because the resources didn't sort of remain in place to be able to do that, even though the need was still there, right? So now we're sort of in this place of building it up. And so we find ourselves as a developer of LIHTC, and we work from eastern shore of Maryland all the way up here into the Northeast. We're growing in this region. We understand that we are very proficient in accessing this LIHTC program and all the government resources, which everybody else says is a pain in the ass and don't want to bother with, but that's what our business is built around, of people willing to sort of battle it out and figure out how to piece together all those resources to make these projects happen, because we know the deep need in communities. I mean, for HDC, we're motivated by the fact that we're in this work because we believe housing is a human right, but it's a market failure that created this condition, and these are the resources that we're trying to figure out how to solve for it. And we had opportunities to do more and to do better, but it's interesting also when we think about challenges, every step of the process, and whether it's a program requirements in terms of making sure that, how are we getting out of the way to make these resources accessible, or about the sort of land development process where one person or one neighborhood or a group of neighbors could get in the way of being able to build a development because you had to go in for a zoning variance, and that's an opportunity for residents to organize and engage and stop that. Or one elected official to get in the way of creating a national program through the Build Back Better program. We had a real opportunity to be a game changer. One official got in the way. And now we're sort of back to where we need to be in terms of figuring out what needs to happen. So I'm going to just go on a little bit longer because I tried to make it like a top 10 list, but ended up like with 37 different things about what's challenging. So construction costs, inflation, interest rates, rising insurance costs right now for operators of existing affordable housing and also for new construction is starting to blow things out of the water. And so all these things end up pushing, like you're maximizing the rents you can charge because all the expenses are increasing on the other side. And at some point, you turn upside down and your deal's dead, right? And we are grateful for the opportunity to have this magic resources at nonprofits doing affordable housing, but even those in the market right now, their deals are stalled because they can't figure it out and they don't have access to what we do because they're not serving the most vulnerable. I would also say that in terms of other development that adds cost to financing is, even if you do have some sites, are they buildable sites in terms of adequate infrastructure, access to utilities, water and sewer, the land development process? Yeah, Eileen and I were just talking about, you may be ready to flip the switch on saying, we have these resources to go, but if you're not looking in-house about how you're helping the developer navigate through that process and helping them remove those barriers, and you may think you're being helpful, but at the end of the day, like, you're just getting in the way. And all that time and effort costs money, and then also you're pushed against all these deadlines, the deadlines that Ira talked about in terms of whether the program requirements or timelines. And when your capital stack is like 12 to 15 to 25 sources, you got to navigate all those variables to get this project to close. So it's no wonder a private developer doesn't want to get involved in figuring out affordable housing.
Yeah. Great. Excellent answer. Thank you, Dana. Marty, are there additional things you want to add, especially with the local lens of what challenges exist?
So I'll pick up where you left off, Dana. Is really so the startup costs of doing any larger and even smaller affordable housing developments for a typical LIHTC deal, it's generally like $75,000 to $100,000 before you as a developer are going to see any reimbursement for the environmental, for the appraisals, for all of the work that goes into your architectural and engineering just to get the project off the ground. And so if you have multiple projects going at the same time, they all have that $75,000 to $100,000 startup cost. So really to keep your pipeline going, it really takes some pretty deep resources. In addition to that, as Fred said, there's lots of great resources available right now. However, they're not going to be around forever, and we're going to end up back to where we were just a few years ago, where there are a handful of sources, but we have to be mindful of who we're using and how they're used. And so, for example, the affordable housing program through the Federal Home Loan Bank has long been one of those gap funders for low-income housing tax credit projects, and that has since gone away, where the Federal Home Loan Bank has shifted the focus to smaller developments. And while we as United Neighborhood Centers we like to do some tax credit properties, as well as smaller 2 to 4, 2 to 10 units, like that really fit in the neighborhoods in Northeast Pennsylvania that we work. But it takes a source away from the tax credit properties that we do, and it's challenging keeping all of that capital stack together, and while construction costs are increasing and insurance is killing deals now.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
Thank you so much, Marty. I know that Ira touched on this in our first panel about some of the strategies to best align some resources to advance projects, discussing how what dollars are being used where. But Dana, I'd love to hear from you about what some strategies you're aware of that will help align these resources to get things moving.
Relentless discipline on trying to figure out how to fit the pieces of the puzzle together. I would say one of the challenges that we have here in the state, as it relates to the LIHTC program, even now, every year, PHFA, who's the administrative agency for that program, doesn't have a consistent schedule for application, right? And so as a developer, you're trying to figure out your own schedule, and that is like the linchpin of figuring out your deal. But yet here we are in, April now? And we don't know if there's going to be a round this year. We may have 3 deals in the pipeline, but we don't know when they're going to roll that out or if they're going to roll that out. And like AHP and other resources that are available, they all have time clocks as well. And so sometimes the timing and schedules of different programs do not align. And that's the biggest challenge of oftentimes, like, you may have to put in placeholders in order to access AHP after you put in your LIHTC application, because the deadlines don't meet. I would love to see better coordination, and that's hard, because if you're a national program and you're dealing with a local agency, how do you do that in a way that is efficient and makes sense? But I really feel like it'd be great if programs could be talking to each other, or get some more consistency, I think, from the state's perspective to lock in. At one point, PHFA did have a consistent schedule. And that may have been about like a decade ago that I recall. And they also had 2 application cycles. Do you remember that, Cynthia? You could apply 2 times to accommodate when your projects were ready. So it doesn't seem like I'm challenged by being able to recommend like solutions or strategies, because everything is changing all the time. And so you just have to be flexible and nimble and keep adapting and figure out like how to keep your project alive.
Yeah. Marty, I'll turn that question to you as well. I mean, you've had some great success at UNC at advancing some projects. How were you best able to align some of those resources to make those happen?
Well, it's one of the nice things of working in Northeast Pennsylvania is we know the players, and it really helps when it comes to investors, when it comes to even funders. Like the affordable housing development world isn't all that big, and the players, even within PHFA and with the state and federal, you get to know a lot of the people as you continue to go through the process. But locally, like with the city and with the county and even more like federal politicians, it helps to know them, and it helps to align those resources when you have political support locally that can really help to advocate for you and help to advocate for the communities in which we're doing affordable housing work in.
I just would add to that, I think that's an important part of the equation. You think about what it takes. You need a buildable site, and you need resources, and the other bucket to making this work is the political will and community support, which you can't necessarily monetize, but those relationships get called on all the time to be able to help you break down these barriers.
Wonderful. I do want to talk in a moment here about the role of equity and inclusion in some of these approaches, but I'm going to pose to Fred just as a kind of a continuation of this discussion. What are strategies that you've seen to best kind of layer those resources to fill in some of the financing gaps? And are there any new products that our region could consider? You know, we had mentioned PHFA, ARPA grants. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about the challenges, but how could they be used to our advantage to layer in those resources?
Well, I think one of the things is just becoming aware of where the resources are, where they're coming from, and just familiarizing yourself. Like right now, I know PHFA has a grant program out that's pretty flexible. I think it's like $100 million for the state of Pennsylvania, but it's going to be closing sometime in May. So, you know, if you have a project that's ready to go, great. But if, you know, you're just planning for one for next year, that money's not going to come back around. So, again, it's having the familiarity with the amount of money that's out there. The Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh, the AHP program, as Marty mentioned a little bit earlier, we do what's called a housing needs assessment of our footprint, which includes Delaware, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And we take a look at the attributes of the housing needs there, whether it be home ownership, tax credit developments, rentals, or even the development of shelters. And we try to balance it out from year to year, you know, as we balance it out and as we put in priorities. Sometimes some projects get hurt. I think we made the correction to tax credits because again, we're trying to be a little of everything to everybody without being to the detriment of any one particular type of development. But that's very difficult, and it's tricky from year to year. One of the ways that we try to balance it out is through an educational type program, very similar to what we're doing today. It's called Blueprint Communities. And I'm going to give a shameless plug here for the Federal Home Loan Bank on it. And next year, we're going to be starting it up in northeastern Pennsylvania, or eastern Pennsylvania, I should say. And basically, it is a capacity building session for communities. And the way that it will work is communities from eastern Pennsylvania will be able to apply. And they were going to have to form a team of one of our member banks, nonprofits, local government entity, local representation, and form that team and go through the whole process of community planning. And we provide the training, but community planning all the way to identifying a project, all the way to identifying some of the funding sources to get that project done. So that is something that I would encourage Scranton to participate in, because it sounds like you are primed and ready to go for this. And I'm just be ready to hear more about it. As I said, we're planning this year to unveil it for next year. But things like that, things like today, these are all tools that help you really put all this information, getting exposure, the networking that happens to this. I mean, aside from what you're hearing from us and all the wonderful speakers, it's the networking that occurs, just knowing the resources and getting to know the folks that could possibly help you.
Thank you, Fred. And that's I'm very excited to hear about the Blueprint communities, and I think that could be a change maker for our community. And I do think, as you pointed out, not only the networking and hearing from all of you, but the work that we'll be doing this afternoon around developing some strategies for here and now, and Blueprint communities being one of those things on our to-do list, which is fantastic. Fred, I'm going to. Well, you kind of covered a lot of that. I do want to just mention real quick, if you could touch on some of the compliance issues. I mean, I know we kind of touched on it a little bit, but if you can kind of elaborate on what some of the compliance issues that you've seen that have kind of gotten in the way.
Yeah, sure. So, of course, with any source of funds, there comes some strings, right? And some of the compliance issues that I've seen that kind of contradict between funding sources are sometimes unit costs. So some of them have a cap that's a little bit lower than others, and as you're putting together your funding stack, and if you have like 20 different sources in there, you know, they don't always line up, and it makes it very difficult. So while it appears that you may be able to access some money, in actuality you can't, because you're using other monies. So that is on the front end. On the back end is all the reporting and all the compliance that you have to do just to use the money. So then at some point you got to ask, is the squeeze worth the juice, right? You're going to say, hey, yeah, you know, I would love to be able to access this, but I don't have staff to report on this for the next 20 years. So those are the types of things that need to be looked at if you're looking to apply. Like, what are the strings that are attached? Does it conflict with any other funding sources that I have in my project? And then what am I going to have to do for the next 15 to 20 years to make sure that I'm in compliance with what I just received?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'd love to hear from all three of you about how you go about incorporating the values around equity and inclusion in your approach to housing development. What role does that play for you? And Dana, I'll start with you and we'll go around. Yeah.
Sure. I would like to just add a statement I always say in the LIHTC world: when you're out of compliance, you're out of business. It is unforgiving when you make a mistake. And Jamie, I'm sure you invest in LIHTC, PNC invests in LIHTC deals, and as an investor, would you ever want to do business with a developer that fell out of compliance and put a unqualified person in a unit? You're done. And so it is an incredible issue. I mean, LIHTC is sort of the highest governing compliance, and then get alone all the other resources that you need to manage. So it is one of the biggest risks that we take. But one of the most exciting things that I think for HDC, as we're looking into making sure we are doing development, that we're using an equity lens in our work, and making sure, I think just like the questions that were asked earlier, who is being impacted by the decisions that we're making today, and are they at the table and being part of that process and coming up with solutions? And it's one of the frames that we use in our development in terms of incorporating resident feedback and voice, doing design charrettes for every development that incorporates existing community residents, as well as a broader community engagement process, even before the land development process, where it becomes part of the public record. But this is early stage engagement of communities, identifying project champions early on, because even though you think you may know a neighborhood and a community, it only takes one or two voices and sort of a narrative to begin to spread, regardless of the facts that you keep putting out there. So being able to do broader community engagement. I will also share that from an operating standpoint, looking deeply at your resident selection process when you're thinking about where can you affect change, like what are the things that are under your control, right? So for us, we took a deep look at our process for reviewing criminal backgrounds and credit checks, and recognizing where do we get in the way and put up barriers for individuals. So we have completely revamped that process. A lot of affordable housing developers, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, when someone has a conviction, they will immediately receive a rejection letter. And then they'll get a letter from their attorney saying, or are in legalese saying, you have 10 days to appeal this process, so please feel free to write us a letter and let us know what this is about. If you know anybody with that history, they get doors shut in their face all the time. So one more door, they're like, I'm done. They're not coming back, they're not going to appeal. Just think about the applicants that we have and the histories that they have, how many people we have turned away, and in fact contributed to that divide in terms of the racial sort of inequality. So for us, we do a further review process. It's a trauma-informed process. We worked with regional legal housing services on that to make sure that we are transforming the way that we review and accept applicants that come into our housing. The other thing I'm really excited about is really understanding that, yes, our mission is to do affordable housing, but again, what is in our control, and how do we create economic opportunity for others through that affordable housing? So looking at supplier diversity. There are requirements that you may have to meet with various funding sources in terms of working with diverse businesses, minority and women businesses. Some of them are very low standards, I will say, with very little sort of teeth in terms of, sort of best effort. But HDC is saying it's not a best effort. It is something that we're going to do with applied discipline. I think PHFA gives you 1 point if you get 1% of your total development costs going to MB and WBE, which makes a statement in itself of its value, right? If you do 10%, you get more points. But still, just getting 1% for 1 point, I feel like that's not good enough. You should get nothing. But what happens?
Dana, can you explain that acronym just for those who might not be familiar?
Which one did I use?
WMB.
Okay. Women certified and minority certified businesses. So HDC, we've analyzed that we have $26 million a year in discretionary spend. That means we can control where we spend that money, and we're making a commitment over the next 5 years to get our spend to minority, women, and other diverse businesses up to 25%. But first you have to sort of know the landscape and your contractors and their commitment and convening and doing advocacy. So it's just a really great way, I think, again, to create economic opportunity for disenfranchised. People have been disenfranchised from this process. So those are a few ways that we're looking at DEI work.
Great. How about you, Marty? At UNC, what are the ways that you bring in equity and inclusion into the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so in the development work, we're always seeking the WMBEs. It's challenging. It's challenging in Northeast Pennsylvania to find contractors and other subcontractors who do that kind of work. United Neighborhood Centers, we are a WMBE in our board makeup, so that really helps us to get that point that's on the tax credit application. But we really take pride in that and feel strongly that we want that diversity on our board of directors as the organization that's making the decisions about where we're moving next as far as housing development. In addition to that, we do our own property management, and it takes a good team. And like Dana said about the tenant selection plan, you could have a really good tenant selection plan, but you need your property managers to really understand it and really understand what you're trying to get across. And that falls into the compliance piece, but it also falls into make sure that you have a good, diverse group of tenants who are living at your apartments that fit all of the compliance areas, but also that make a good, rich community for all of those who live there.
How about you, Fred?
Well, yeah, I'm going to talk about this from a couple different perspectives. I'll start from the Federal Home Loan Bank and what we've done as a funder. So one of the things, as I mentioned, is when we had our housing needs assessment, we took a look at some of the trends that we have, and we found that, and again, it's a national trend, not even so much as a local trend, but it's something that is effective, and that is minority home ownership. For African American and Latino homeowners, it is more difficult to get into home ownership. So what we did was we prioritized that point-wise within our application to encourage more of that type of activity. So it's actually 10% of our scoring. So if you are an organization that is developing minority home ownership and you are operating in a low-income census tract, high minority census tract, you get 10 points right off of our application, which is a pretty substantial amount, considering that we only have 100 points. From one of the other hats that I wear, I'm currently a commissioner at my local housing authority with the Allentown Housing Authority, and there, we embrace the DE&I to the point to where we're putting it into our hiring practices, and I'm pleased to report that we've hired the only Latino executive director in the state of Pennsylvania. He'll be starting on May 1st. So it's really where the rubber meets the road. Do you believe in it? Are you going to hire that way? Of course, we have diverse residents, but our staff and our board reflecting the residents that we serve. So that's one of the things that we always need to be mindful of, and it's a challenge out there for other organizations. And then I'm going to throw out two other things that can be done here, and one is affirmatively furthering fair housing is one of the ways that you can address DE&I. I mean, it's under a different name, but it's so important. This work has been going on for decades and not really gaining the traction that it deserves and needs. Currently, they've extended the period to comment on it, and I would encourage all of you to go in there and place your comments on there in support. What's happened is over the years, it's been in existence, but it really hasn't gotten any teeth. And I think we're now to the point to where we need to see some teeth in there to make some change and effectuate some change along those lines. And then lastly, within the organizations that you have here within your community, if you have what's called a community housing development organization or a CHODO, that is a certain type of organization, typically a nonprofit, that has a board composition of at least having 1/3 of folks that come from low to moderate income census tracts. It's a state designation, and it's done to encourage, that perspective from that aspect of the community to come out and get their voice heard on the development that's occurring within their communities. And quite often, they partner with an organization like Marty's and Dana's, and that's how, they get their expertise and their capacity to do some of these bigger projects. So those are the...
Great.
I know.
Please.
I think that the CHODO and thinking about the commitment of resident participation in boards, we do have resident participation. We have one representative. We've tried to build more, really hard, right? And you think about the board commitments and their obligations and to sustain that participation. So one of the ways that we looked at, how do we reduce the barrier to entry, right? So we created a resident advisory council that is actually chaired by our resident board member, and that creates a conduit and platform to exchange sort of board decisions, information, feedback loops that doesn't necessarily require you have to, maintain participation at the board in order to be good standing, to attend this many meetings, and to really the kind of commitments that you need to make in terms of somebody being low resource and the complexity of their lives is really hard to sustain. We've had so many residents start, and after the first board meeting, they're like, I can't do this. And it's not because, it's because of the structure and the sort of the amount of commitment that's required. So thinking about other vehicles that you can reflect that voice. I also wanted to mention, and just to put out there, that there is an opportunity through the LIHTC program to design and develop rental housing that at the end of the year 15 compliance period, it can convert to home ownership. So something that's really, I don't know, Marty, if your group is doing that.
We've not done any of that.
We've done one development like that. It's in Lititz in Lancaster County, and we're currently selling those townhouses to existing residents. Just a very, I think, interesting tool to utilize. And you just have to think about the planning part of it going into it, what that development and amenities and design looks like as it to be a home ownership sort of program in year 15. So think about creating wealth that way.
Yeah, and I'm sorry,
No, please.
because Dana just triggered something when she mentioned earlier about the contracting and procurement. One of the things that we could do or need to do a better job at is building the capacity of our local contractors. We have a lot of great minority-owned businesses and contractors that are out there, but you know what? They may not have the capacity to be bonded. They may not know how to reply to RFPs. Or even get involved, but you know what? They're great carpenters, painters, plumbers, electricians, and we need to find a way to get them engaged, either increase their capacity, because it's an untapped resource. And there is an opportunity to really include DE&I within the projects that we have going forward. Because at the end of the day, we talked about earlier about the wage rates that we pay. Well, guess what? These guys are nowhere near making $80 an hour. And would they benefit from it? Absolutely. So I think that's another area for improvement and an opportunity for us to engage more in the DE&I space.
Can I add to that? That contractors also, like we as developers have a lot of compliance that we need to keep up with. The contractors in doing, especially tax credit projects, really have similar compliance. And if they don't have the capacity to do that compliance, it really can throw a project into turmoil.
Yeah, or the contractor. So like if you use a contractor that's good on your job and you let me know and he's an MBE, I'll be like, I'll take him. And then I let somebody else know and they're going to take him. And all of a sudden we flattened them because they weren't ready for that growth and we didn't build the capacity. So how do we be responsible in being able to sort of grow that pipeline of business?
But
yeah,
aside from that, though, how many guys don't we have out there that just don't even have the MBE designation? We know they're minority contractors. They just don't have that state certification. And they're saying, do I really need it? Because, I go through the expense of getting the certification, and yet there's no jobs or opportunities for me. So I'm not going to do it. But it's still a disservice to them. So it's almost more of a barrier then a help to them to get into the
And that's
system.
another example for HDC. We just require a self-affidavit. Yes, we know that if they're not certified, it may not count for PHFA, and we're trying to connect with technical assistance providers to help them get certification. But that in itself is a barrier, that you have to prove that you're a woman or a person of color. And guess what? If someone's getting up and over on that, you're going to find out, and then they're going to not have business anymore. So ultimately, it's going to get found out. So we're not worried about sort of this bias that thinks that somebody's always going to try and work the system, which we know there are folks that do it. But at the end of the day, it's a very small portion that ends up perpetuating a narrative that is not the truth.
I think you touched more on that, yes, these are challenges, but also massive opportunity, right, as well. So a little bit to Asia's point in our first panel about what are the opportunities that exist to engage some of our contractors, build their capacity, that helps everybody. We've touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to expound a little bit more on what are the types of partnerships that would be beneficial in developing affordable housing. I think there's some great examples. We talked earlier about public and private partnerships, but if you have some great examples, I'd love to hear from you. I'll start with Dana on that one as well.
Yeah, so we've really, since I came on board as a CEO, I will say we had a long legacy. We've been around for 50 years of leadership that really was focused on HDC becoming the premier provider of affordable housing and wanted to do it on its own. And I think through time and through leadership coming up the ranks, that we recognize you can't do it alone and you need partners. And we have to all figure out how to leverage our strengths in whatever way possible. So for us, that is the way we move forward with all of our developments. It would be great, like if Marty and I think about how to partner together, or looking at communities where someone understands the need. It could be a community service provider or that understands the need and understands how to provide support to that constituency, but they don't know LIHTC, right? So we come in with the LIHTC, we can help you get there, and let's partner together and see what that looks like. In Allentown, we are working on a project with Alliance for Building Communities. Jamie, you're on their board, and with the Eastern PA Down Syndrome Center to build senior housing with a set-aside that serves individuals with intellectual disabilities. So the smaller nonprofit, which is basically a parent group, has leveraged their interest to figure out how to mobilize and meet this need and also bring in the services. The partnership with ABC helps us navigate the political relationships and community relationships that we need, and we're coming in with the expertise around LIHTC. So that's an example. Another example, in the city of Lancaster, there's a vacant hospital campus. We were selected as a redeveloper to provide the affordable portion. There's a market rate developer doing the market rate side, but we have brought in the Milagro House, which is a transitional housing program for women and their children that focus on economic mobility to service transitional housing through a carve-out, a condoing it in that building. We're working with United Disability Services to double the amount of people or units that serve that population, and they're contributing a $750,000 operating reserve to ensure that rents are affordable at 30% of their income. In addition, we've also partnered with Habitat for Humanity. There was multiple parcels, and we were looking at that home ownership option through LIHTC, and we couldn't really, that particular parcel, we couldn't figure it out at scale, and the neighbors did not want at scale, so we brought in Habitat to explore doing, and we just gave them our site, and they're going to be building, 8 affordable home ownership units there. So thinking about those ways, even the opportunity of saying, like, this is not the right opportunity for us, how can we bring in a partner to make that happen? So really proud of sort of just bringing and meeting that need from like homelessness to home ownership through a development opportunity.
Great. Marty, do you also have some examples of beneficial partnerships when you're developing?
Yeah, so really, we have the benefit of being United Neighborhood Centers. We've been in existence for 100 years. We provide supportive services, and we have for 100 years to folks in need in Northeast Pennsylvania. But really, that really gives us a leg up on doing housing development, and for others doing housing development in this area where we have a very strong supportive services team that can really help all the tenants in these developments really thrive and succeed. And so we as UNC provide supportive services in 6 other developments that we don't own or manage. But it really kind of, it gives the tenants at all of those residents just the ability to thrive where they're at and where they want to be.
Great. I'm going to expand a little bit on that question, Fred, for you. So if you could develop a recipe for affordable housing development, in addition to partnerships, what are those ingredients that are needed to make it successful? Okay,
I'm gonna start. Well, a long time ago, I was an executive director of an affordable housing development corporation, and we've had some pretty good success there. And one of the things that we've really found, or I learned at that time, was really including 3 pieces, and they were all mentioned here by both Dana and Marty, is really including 3 components of the partnership within your community. And that is, number 1, your local government. They are a stakeholder in this. The nonprofit or the development agency, and then the for-profit side. But the 3 kind of have to work together hand in hand. If you take any one of them away, it makes it very difficult. It's not to say that it can't be done, but it's not the healthiest for the community. So they all have to work like within a partnership. Now, what does that look like? Well, from community to community, it could be different, and it should be different. There is no one magic formula that you replicate from any one community and say, okay, yeah, we're going to do this over there. I'll tell you where one of the highlights that I could give you that I saw very, very well was Tamaqua. There's a guy there named Mike Ogursky, and he is like the community cheerleader, and he's organized and brought so many resources to that community. So it's really identifying your Mike Ogurskys in your communities and bringing them and have them lead the way. Another partner that I think is constantly overlooked, and it kind of falls like within the government side, so to speak, is your local housing authorities. So your local housing authorities currently house your most vulnerable citizens that you have. This is who we're doing a lot of the work for or with. But quite often, they're cast aside, right? They're not included in, sometimes talks like this. Their residents aren't very well represented. So I'm going to tell you, they are some of the most untapped resources. So some of the HUD funding that comes through them. They are poised to do development in a lot of your communities and expand. And some of them are. They're spinning off nonprofits, and they're doing it because they have access to other funding that sometimes the other developers don't have. And the partnership there would lie in just even within the Section 8 program, and where they have the ability to project-base these Section 8 vouchers into some of these projects that are being developed and to get them the cash flow. But until they are included and they're at the table, you're just going to see that they're probably going to hang on or not develop their Section 8 program to the degree to where they're going to have project-based vouchers. They're just going to hold on to them and just voucher up there. And then the other one that they have is the ability to use your project-based voucher, your Section 8 voucher, to purchase a home. That is something that's available to all housing authorities, but they have to take advantage of it and institute that program. Now, it's not to say that every single Section 8 recipient is going to buy a home, but for the percentage that do, that is a great way to get into home ownership. That is a great way to incorporate them into what's going on.
Great. I want to open it up for questions, and we'll also give some chance for our panelists to say a few last words. Are there any questions we have for our panelists? Mike.
Just a comment to follow up on what Fred was just saying. With the Housing Choice Voucher Program right now, people who have vouchers are having a hard time finding affordable rents because that sets it at what we're talking about, fair market rent, which is actually 40%. So 60% of the units are more expensive, so they're having a hard time getting them or using them out there in the community. I've noticed Scranton Housing Authority has dozens of them out there that give it to families who can't find apartments that are affordable. So these kind of partnerships give them other options to be able to use those vouchers.
Yeah, and I would add just on the economic side of doing a development, to combine LIHTC with a project-based contract, like honestly will give, like love bubbles will come out my eyeballs, because that's what makes a deal work. And you haven't heard us talk about hard debt, right? Permanent debt, because it's really these projects are so thin, and we can't carry a lot of debt, right? But if we have an existing resource like a contract, a 20-year HAP, that guarantees, not only in terms of helping on the development side, but you will guarantee that residents won't pay more than 30% of their income on rent. So this challenge you have with residents being cost burdened can be solved with that. But that's about, I think, the priority of the Housing Authority in terms of what other uses they may have and priorities that they have for themselves, and also at the federal level in terms of bringing more of those resources to bear to ensure that kind of affordability. And then, in addition, thinking about the magic sauce or ingredient, Marty had touched on the importance of services and having robust supportive services on site, because we do know how that housing stability, once you've waited so long to find affordable housing, but it takes one incident to sort of disrupt that stability. But by having a trusted provider on site that can connect you to resources or deeper service delivery, or even through the pandemic where we had the rent relief, we're dealing now with another issue with that cliff happening where people had that kind of support, and we need to sort of figure out the pathway forward when those resources don't exist. So very stressed on the operator side to not have that infrastructure. And if you don't have a trusting relationship with a resident, they're not going to come to you in advance, even just to sort of come to your community meeting, but in crisis, right, if they don't trust who they're working with.
Laura and then Asia.
Fred, my question's for you, just to expand, if possible, slightly on the Communities Blueprint program that you talked about, and perhaps some examples of areas where you've seen change come from participation in that.
Sure. So again, the Blueprint Community program was really born now several years ago. Out of a need, because we placed at that time such a high priority on having a community plan, and some of these communities didn't have their own plan, and they're saying, hey, look, we can't access your grant without these points. What can we do? So we said, okay, we're going to devise a way for you to have a designation, and we're going to show you how to make a plan, and you'll make your own plan, so then you could later participate and access the funding. And as I mentioned before, a long time ago, when I was with that nonprofit, I was executive director there. I was invited to participate in the very first cohort, and the example that I led with Mike Kogursky was the Tamaqua. So Tamaqua was one of the very first Blueprint communities, and if you were to take a look at the evolution of Tamaqua and the amount of different projects that they've had and what they've been able to do, it's clearly a success story. But there, like I said, really the leader was Mike Kogursky, and at that time he worked for Senator Dave Argyle, and he really put together the team, and he invited me to be part of that team as the developer, the nonprofit developer. And there we did a tax credit deal, very successful, which grew into like 2 or 3 other ones. And as we presented, because you present in front of the rest of the cohort, so there was like 15 other communities that were there, and we started talking about what we did. We identified a project, we got it funded, and everybody's like, wow. What'd you do? And like, well, we're converting a warehouse. We're like, well, we have a warehouse. And it turned into us doing one for another community. So we actually, Hamburg, we did a deal over there, a tax credit deal over there. So it's really about putting people together and then just exposing them to what could be done. And then, the sky's the limit from there.
Great. Asia and then Cindy.
Okay. First of all, I want to say thank y'all. Y'all are amazing. I like everything y'all saying. To touch on the one issue you said about the housing choice voucher, I think that is an awesome program. I was in that before, and a lot of times, I think with the issue with the housing choice voucher is the people that are working there. Sometimes I think they come in, clock in, they do whatever their workload is, and they go home. I don't think that they're like trying to develop more or tell people, hey, you can work to buy a house or you can do something like that. I don't think they're educated on it or something. And then some of them are quite just rude. Like I know with me trying to rent out my house now, and the girl who I already have someone who needs help who I'm trying to rent it to, she went through she spilled out everything, and she said, I've been calling, they're not answering. I called. I said, I'll call and find out. The man at first was nice, then he's like, why are you calling? You have no business calling here. And hung up, like he was just so nasty. And it's like, I'm the one, as a realtor, I've tried to help people with Section 8 get a place. When I tell you the landlords go running, you say section, they say, what? I don't want none of that, I ain't doing none of that, I ain't touching none of that. They don't care about fair housing rules and crap, they don't care about that. they don't want Section 8 at all. So the fact to have a landlord calling you, trying to get your voucher used, and you hang up on you, or you nasty, he's like, I don't ever want you to call me again. Or like, some of the people working there are nasty. And the only reason I know that he's been there for years is because I've dealt with him in the past when my sister was on Section 8, and I had to call Harrisburg, and they had to have a meeting with them, and he's still working there. I'm like, oh God. But I think a lot of issue is people that are working there are just coming to clock in. They're not trying to develop what they can do more with the funding that they're getting in. They could care less.
I think
That's that one issue.
I think you raise a really important point, which I often try to just think about when we talk about it as a systems issue, as accessing affordable housing and these programs that are available. But systems are made up of people who make decisions, right? And the behavioral changes and the mindset of how we are approaching that matters, right? And so I don't know what the answer is, but it's important to not separate the fact that this is some sort of elusive system we can't control when every single one of us participate in those systems. And then through behavioral change and policy change, we can change the system.
So Dana, that's a great point, and I'm going to just mention this. So every housing authority is independent of one another, right? And a lot of people think that maybe the state or the federal government governs or oversees what the local housing authority does, and that's really not the case. So each housing authority is governed by their board of commissioners, and each board of commissioner is appointed by either your mayor or, if you're a county, by your commissioners. So if there's something not quite right, your avenue is really to try to see, okay, let's talk to the commissioners. If the commissioners are a problem, when do they term out? How do we get some new representation of commissioners, or maybe more reflective of the people that they're serving in there, so that these types of things don't happen? Now, every commission is required to at least have one resident commissioner. So in Pennsylvania, we're mostly comprised of 5 commissioners, could go up to 7, but of the 5, 1 has to be a resident. And you might have an ear there.
The other issue that you brought up that I wanted to say is regarding when you brought up about minority people who can do work and stuff like that. Like, I've come across that myself a lot, like where I have like people from like the Hispanic background and stuff like that, and they do excellent work, but they don't know how to go downtown and fill out the paperwork to become licensed in Scranton, and that's a whole nother problem. Becoming, it's like a monopoly or something. From what I'm, as a realtor for going on 9 years, I've come across people saying, oh, I don't want to do the work in Scranton. It's so hard to get permit or get this and that. They don't want to touch it. And let alone the people who are already licensed in Scranton. It's like you can maybe work under their license, but they charge you so much on the side that the people are like, the job ain't even worth it. So it's like if they could start something in Scranton where it's easier to become licensed in Scranton to be able to do work, maybe people will want to do the work. And then we can have some type of team that is speaking in another language that can help Spanish people that don't know how to do all this paperwork. I used to be office manager for years, so that's how, and I'm a notary, so I know the paperwork stuff, but it'd be overwhelming me too. So I can't imagine not knowing the language, trying to become a licensed contractor for Scranton. How can you be that? You know how to do the work better than most of the people doing it, but because you don't know your paperwork, or maybe you just got your papers here or something and you're trying to understand it, someone needs to help them because they want to work and they can work and they do the best of the work.
So, Asia, I'm making eye contact with Eileen over there.
And that was 100% correct until January 1 of this year. We redid the entire process.
Okay.
We changed the way we do the licensing. The licensing is online. We do actually have translation services that are available as well. Everything is online. You can follow it right through. You can do it at home. You can pay with your credit card. You can print out your license and your.
So I'm gonna repeat what you just said to make sure it's on the mic. Is that you said that it was that way until January 1st of this year, at which time you have made the application available online with translation services, ability to pay right online. So you've really streamlined the process that it takes for contractors to be licensed in the city of Scranton.
We also made it easier as well because there's 2 tracks to get licensed. One is if you're certified, which is easy, everybody has that. And then we have another methodology. It's more or less the grandfather methodology if you've been doing this for so many years. And before we required everything up until including your birth certificate, I think, in order to get it. We got rid of that.
Okay.
So we still have that, but it's easier to get through. It doesn't require as much.
Well, I think like a training or something for people that don't have that, like they're coming from another country, they can't probably prove you, hey, I've been doing this since I was 5. They really know how to do the work, maybe go through like a few weeks, adding on a little training or something, where they can get it that way, which makes it easier.
So don't underscore, your local CAP agency probably has a Start Your Business program, which could provide them a lot of resources. SCORE is another program where retired seniors that run businesses give assistance to. So there's other agencies that are out there. It's not all beholden on your local municipality, but I think it's really exposing the folks, because you don't know what you don't know, just to be able to direct and guide people to where they go. But that's where the partnership really goes into play.
We've had some great speakers here this morning. I'm thrilled to have them. I would like to give a round of applause to our speakers today. And we look forward to working this afternoon on what some of those solutions can be, because this is, after all, an action lab. So we are going to walk away with some actionable items that we can make some real change within our community. So thank you for being with us.